All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the Congressional Record, specifically the House of Representatives session from February 7th, 2025. You might think the Congressional Record sounds a bit dry, but it's actually incredibly fascinating. It's like a behind-the-scenes look at how our government works. We're talking about major bills, heated debates, crucial votes. It's all there. And today, we're going to break it down for you. We'll uncover the key arguments, the standout speeches, and even some moments of bipartisanship. We'll connect the dots and see how it all fits into the bigger picture of policy and governance. And of course, we'll figure out what it all means for you, the average citizen.
What I find most interesting about the Congressional Record is that it's not just a dry account of laws being made. It's full of human drama, personal stories, and local issues that often get lost in the national news.
That's so true. It's easy to forget that these are real people making decisions that affect all of us. And this particular session started off on a pretty inspiring note.
Definitely. The opening prayer by Dr. Kevin Moore was quite memorable.
Oh yeah, Representative Strong, who introduced Dr. Moore as his pastor, he looked really proud.
It's a good reminder that even in the halls of Congress, personal connections and faith play a role.
And Dr. Moore really went all out. He invoked Joseph, Joshua, Solomon. Talk about setting a high standard for our elected officials.
He did. He was calling for integrity, strength, wisdom, all the things we hope to see in our leaders.
Exactly. And speaking of things we hope to see in our leaders, I was really struck by how many representatives took the time to honor people from their districts. It was really heartwarming.
It really was. It's a reminder that behind all the policy debates, there are real people whose lives are directly affected by the decisions made in Congress.
Representative Fitzpatrick's tribute to Anna Payne was particularly moving.
It's incredible, isn't it? She battled cystic fibrosis and cancer, yet still found the strength to serve as an elected official.
Her story is truly inspiring. And then there was Representative Garcia honoring Linda Cerati, who overcame polio at just 1 year old and went on to lead a life full of service.
These stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
They really are. And they provide a much-needed dose of hope and inspiration, especially when we're surrounded by so much negativity and division.
Speaking of division, things got pretty heated when H.R. 26, the Protecting American Energy Production Act, came up for debate.
Oh yeah, the bill aimed at preventing a federal ban on fracking. This one really got people fired up on.
It did. This debate really reflects the larger tensions we see around energy policy and presidential power. Strong opinions on both sides, economic arguments clashing with environmental concerns.
Representative Westerman, a Republican from Arkansas, made a strong case in support of the bill. He argued that fracking is a clean, safe, and essential driver of American energy independence and economic prosperity.
He even cited a study projecting dire economic consequences if fracking were banned, like millions of jobs lost and a significant hit to our GDP. But of course, in a debate like this, any study should be examined with a critical eye.
For sure. And on the other side, we have Representative Husband, a Democrat from California, who called the bill political theater and a love letter to big oil.
He argued that it wouldn't actually lower energy costs and expressed serious concerns about fracking's impact on the environment.
Representative DeGette, also a Democrat, echoed those concerns. She specifically mentioned the dangers of harmful chemicals contaminating our water and polluting the air.
It's a classic clash of values, economic growth versus environmental protection. And it's all playing out against a backdrop of anxieties about presidential power and the influence of corporate lobbies.
Absolutely. And while the debate was heated, there were some attempts at finding common ground. Representative Pfluger, a Republican from Texas and the bill's sponsor, defended fracking as a safe and affordable way to produce energy while expressing hope for bipartisan support.
Bipartisan support on this issue. I'm interested to see how that played out.
Me too. Let's dive into the details of the vote and see who sided with whom.
Well, the vote on H.R. 26 largely fell along party lines, but it wasn't completely one-sided. There were a few surprises.
Oh, there were. Tell me more.
Representative Stauber, a Republican from Minnesota, delivered a passionate speech about how vital reliable energy is, especially during those harsh Minnesota winters. He stressed how his constituents really depend on it.
Yeah, I can imagine. No one wants to be left out in the cold.
Exactly. And on the other side of the aisle, we had Representative Kasten, a Democrat from Illinois, who introduced a motion to recommit the bill, essentially sending it back to committee for further review.
So what was his reasoning behind that?
Well, he was worried about the potential for presidential overreach. He cited some actions taken by the Trump administration, specifically the freeze on certain funds approved by Congress and Elon Musk's involvement in government affairs.
So it's not just about fracking itself. It's also about the balance of power between the different branches of government and the influence of figures outside of the traditional political sphere.
Right. This debate really opens up a whole can of worms about how power is used and how policy is made.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Each new discovery reveals another layer of complexity.
Exactly. And this is just the beginning. The congressional record from this day is full of fascinating insights, from passionate speeches on global conflicts to sobering presentations on the national debt. There's a lot more to unpack, so let's keep digging.
Absolutely. Let's
It-
see what else we can uncover.
So we've seen how those personal stories and local concerns can actually intersect with national legislation, and that's what makes this so fascinating. It's not just about abstract laws.
Right.
Like, it's about real people and how these issues actually shape their lives.
Exactly. And as we dig deeper into this session, we see that the fracking debate was really just the tip of the iceberg. There were some really powerful speeches on other critical topics, like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and even the national debt.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those. Starting with Representative Green from Texas.
Mm-hmm.
His condemnation of the U.S. and Israeli actions in Gaza was intense.
Yeah, his speech, it definitely highlights the deep divisions and the passions that surround this conflict.
It's a good reminder that the congressional record isn't just about, bland policy discussions. It's a platform for people to express their really deeply held convictions and challenge the status quo.
And Representative Green definitely did that. He argued that the Palestinians have a right to live in their own land and that any attempt to displace them is just unacceptable. He even compared the situation to apartheid in South Africa.
Wow, that's a serious comparison. It shows how much this issue means to him. It seems like he's really trying to raise awareness and start a conversation about something that he thinks isn't getting enough attention.
And he didn't just stop at words. He announced that he's going to boycott any future vote on sending aid to Israel until there's a change in policy, which is a pretty bold move.
It is. Boycotts can be controversial for sure, but they can also be a powerful way to push for change. It'll be interesting to see if other representatives follow his lead.
It will. And Representative Green didn't just focus on foreign policy. He tied his concerns about Gaza to a bigger critique of President Trump, accusing him of enabling what he sees as injustice.
So we're seeing how these threads connect. Seemingly different issues, foreign policy, domestic politics, even presidential power. It's all connected.
It is. It's a complex web.
Yeah.
And Representative Green even hinted at the possibility of impeachment proceedings against President Trump, mentioning his role in past impeachment efforts.
That's a big statement for sure. It shows how seriously he takes these issues and how far he's willing to go to challenge what he sees as wrongdoing. It also brings up the question, how far is too far when it comes to political dissent?
That's a question for the ages, isn't it? And while Representative Green's speech was all about passion and moral outrage, Representative Schweikert from Arizona took a more data-driven approach in his presentation on the national debt.
Oh, the national debt. That ever-looming cloud. It's one of those issues that can be really overwhelming. It's hard to even wrap your head around the sheer scale of it,
It really is. But what Representative Schweikert did so well was to break it down in a way that's understandable. He connected those big numbers to everyday life and the potential consequences for regular people.
Okay, I'm listening. How do you do that?
Well, he emphasized how fast the debt is growing. He pointed out that in the next 9 years, the U.S. is projected to add another $28 trillion in publicly held debt. That's double the amount that's been accumulated over the past 240 years.
That's a crazy statistic. Doubling the debt in less than a decade. That's a scary thought.
It is. And he explained how this rapid increase could lead to higher interest rates, which would make it even harder for the government to borrow money.
It's a vicious cycle. The more you borrow, the more you have to pay back in interest, which just makes it harder and harder to get out of debt. It's definitely a scary thought.
But he made it even more personal. He pointed out that this isn't just about, future generations. It's about our own retirement, too. He mentioned how Social Security is projected to run out of money in just 8 years.
That's a huge issue. Millions of people rely on Social Security. If that goes away, it would cause so much hardship.
Absolutely. And Representative Schweikert didn't shy away from the political challenges involved in tackling this problem.
I bet. Talking about reforming Social Security or cutting spending. Those are really tough conversations to have, especially during an election year.
Yeah, he admitted that it's hard to even have honest conversations about this because people are so afraid of the political consequences. He even criticized his own colleagues for putting the next election ahead of making tough decisions that would actually benefit the country in the long run.
It's the classic short-term thinking versus long-term consequences problem. isn't it?
It is. And it's not just a U.S. problem either. A lot of industrialized nations are facing similar issues with aging populations and rising debt levels. It's a global trend.
So are there any solutions?
Representative Schweikert suggested a few, but he also acknowledged they're going to require some really difficult choices. He talked about things like reducing spending, modernizing how the government works, and making the tax code more focused on growth. He also emphasized the importance of being innovative and using new technologies.
So efficiency, adaptability, long-term planning, all those things.
Exactly. He also brought up the importance of demographics, specifically the declining birth rate in the U.S.
Fewer babies mean fewer workers in the future,
Yeah.
which could slow down economic growth. It's a complicated issue with really big consequences.
And his solution? He argued that we need to make it easier to adopt new technologies, streamline regulations, and attract talented workers from other countries. He even suggested creating an immigration system based on STEM skills and talent as a way to generate trillions of dollars in new tax revenue over the next decade.
That's a really interesting idea. Immigration is always a controversial topic, and there are definitely some legitimate concerns about how to manage it properly.
He acknowledged those concerns, but his point was that the U.S. can't afford to ignore the reality of a shrinking workforce. He's pushing for a more practical and nuanced approach to a very emotional issue.
It sounds like he's trying to tie economic policy to a larger vision of prosperity. It's not just about the numbers, they're about creating a better future.
You got it. He asked a really important question. What kind of future do we want for our kids and grandkids? And what are we willing to do today to make that happen? Those are questions that go beyond politics. They touch on our shared values and hopes for the future.
These speeches are really powerful reminders that the decisions made in Congress have huge ripple effects that touch every part of American life, from the energy we use to the future of things like Social Security.
And even though we've been talking about these big national issues, it's important to remember that the Congressional Record also captures the concerns of everyday people and communities across the country.
That's true. It's a place where representatives can talk about what's happening back in their districts and fight for what their constituents need.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of those more local stories and see how they fit into the bigger picture of governance, civic engagement, and that whole idea of public service. Welcome back. It's easy to get lost in those big national debates, but it's often at the local level where we see the real impact of what happens in Washington.
You're right. It's all about those real-world effects. And one story that really stuck with me was Representative Thompson from Pennsylvania taking the time to recognize these amazing educators in his district.
Katrina Halassa, John O'Neill, and Krista Galloway from the Akron Public Schools Science and Health Department, they actually received a presidential award for excellence in STEM mentoring. That's a pretty big deal.
Wow, that's incredible. What makes them so special?
Well, they were recognized for their dedication to mentoring students, especially those from backgrounds that are underrepresented in STEM fields. They're really working hard to make sure the next generation of scientists and engineers reflects the diversity of our country.
It's so important to have those role models. It's inspiring to see educators going above and beyond to open those doors for young people.
It is. It shows how those small moments of recognition in the Congressional Record can actually connect to those big societal goals, like educational equity and making sure that science keeps moving forward.
Speaking of moving forward, Representative Sherman from California, who we heard earlier talking about wildfire relief, he also highlighted a company called Ada Space. The name alone caught my attention.
It's a company in Sherman's district, and they're doing some really cool stuff, developing new technologies for spaceflight. They're focusing on the really tough challenges of storing and transferring fuel in space.
Wow, that sounds crucial for the future of space exploration.
It is. And Representative Sherman made a point of saying how important it is to support those small businesses like Ada Space, the ones that are pushing the boundaries of what's possible and really driving innovation.
I love that. It reminds us that the work of Congress isn't just about those big-ticket items. It's also about creating an environment where those smaller businesses can thrive and contribute to progress.
And he even shared a story about how a local community bank gave Ada Space a crucial loan at a really important time. It allowed them to keep going with their research and development.
It's a perfect example of how the different parts of the economy can work together to create success stories.
Right. Local banks, small businesses, government support, it all comes together.
And those successes, like Ada Space's work in spaceflight, they can have a ripple effect,
Yeah.
reaching way beyond their own community.
They really can. We also heard a really touching tribute from Representative Horsford from Nevada. He was honoring the late Mayor Theron Goins of North Las Vegas.
Mayor Goins, what made him so special?
He was a true public servant, dedicated his life to helping his community. He started out in the Air Force and then became an educator, working his way up from a teacher to a principal.
That's an amazing journey. It sounds like he was really passionate about serving others and making a difference through education.
He was, and it didn't stop there. He served on the North Las Vegas City Council for 20 years, 12 of those as mayor pro tempore. He was a tireless advocate for his constituents and a truly beloved figure in the city.
It's so nice to hear stories like that. It's a reminder that even in the midst of all the political battles, there are still people out there who are quietly working to make their communities better.
You said it. And Representative Horsford even shared a really touching detail. Mayor Goins actually got to see his own daughter become the first Black mayor of any city in Nevada. What a legacy.
That's beautiful. An incredible example of how one generation can inspire the next. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this session of the Congressional Record, what are some of the big takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the main one is that this document, the Congressional Record, it's often seen as boring and difficult to understand, but it's actually filled with so many different voices and perspectives. It's a record of our struggles, our triumphs, and our efforts to build a better country.
And by taking the time to actually read it and listen to those voices, we get a much better understanding of what shapes our country and our own role in the process.
Exactly. It reminds us that we're not just passive bystanders in this whole democracy thing. We have a responsibility to stay informed, to talk to each other, and to speak up about the things that matter most to us.
We've covered so much today, from intense debates about energy policy to heartfelt tributes to local heroes. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And this is just a glimpse of what the Congressional Record has to offer. It's a valuable resource. Anyone can access it. And it's definitely worth checking out.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to explore it and see what stories you can find. You might be surprised by what you discover. And who knows? Maybe you'll even be inspired to get involved and help shape the future of our country. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation